Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk a bit about sacrifice. Because it is a very fascinating thing. In fact, if you look at all of the traditions which have carried through to our day from pagan times, the only one which is not practiced in any real way whatsoever, even in the most remote rural environments today, is that of sacrifice. And yet we know that it was an essential part of the past. Now, I believe that a lot of people downplay the importance of sacrifice. They think that sacrifice is something passive, that it's to do with the acceptance of something natural, rather than something active, which we do as individuals or as a community. And a lot of people, I believe, underestimate just the extent to which sacrifice was practiced. In fact, I believe it was the most important ritual or element of ritual in pagan times. Now, the notion of sacrifice, it's basically to give away things in our possession, things which we own, things which are important to us, in order to achieve more closeness and more affinity with the gods. And by the gods, in turn, that means by nature and by natural forces. But in this video I'm going to specifically talk about the various types of sacrifice, rather than go into detail about how sacrifice is practiced, which I'll perhaps talk about more in the future. But really there are about 5 different types of sacrifice, or rather 5 different ways in which sacrifice was important. 5 different things which were achieved through sacrifice. So, to start off, the first would be to get rid of excess. So this is the most obvious one, or one of the most obvious ones. Say for example, the society produces more than it needs, and, so the society produces more than it needs. That's just increasing the brightness. And in order to stop slovenly behaviour, weakness, and degeneracy, I guess, and degradation of the society, which happens in times of peace and prosperity, getting rid of all the excess in terms of what you produce is incredibly beneficial. So, for example, if a smith produces a certain amount of tools or weapons or jewellery, and a society only needs so much, the rest of it can be thrown away. It can be done away with. But food is the main one. So the society produces a large amount of food from hunting and gathering, or else through agriculture in agricultural times. And a large amount of this produce then has to be thrown away when times are good. And of course, it sort of ties in with another point I'm going to make it next, but the next point I wanted to make was about creating necessity. By creating necessity amongst a tribe, as opposed to just simply stopping, the times of laziness which will come with excess, going an extra step further and creating a necessity amongst the tribe to keep hunting, to keep producing, to keep being productive, to keep engaging in the positive elements of that society. If you create a necessity that we will not survive unless we keep doing what we were doing previously, it's a very healthy attitude, in the same way that flexing a muscle makes muscles stronger. In the same way, flexing those elements of the society which keep the society healthy, the more you do that, the healthier the society will be. So that's another way. The third way is a way of giving back to nature. And this is certainly what Varg and Marie always talk about, and it's certainly the most accepted sort of form of sacrifice among people talking about paganism now. Because a lot of people don't want to really believe in sort of the harsher or crueler forms of sacrifice. This is an easy one. Say, for example, if you've hunted and you've killed, say, a boar or whatever, an aurochs, by leaving the carcass out in the forest, you're feeding predators, and you're feeding flies, and you're feeding smaller creatures which will come in the various stages of the rotting of that carcass. Again, more creatures will feed on it, and in that sense you're giving back to nature. If say you're a farmer and you have a large amount of livestock, chicken and sheep and whatever, by allowing some of that livestock to be taken by predators, you're again giving back to nature in the same way. Also, resources which we mine, which we dig up, which we take from the natural world, again serve a purpose in nature as well. And by discarding them, letting them go back to nature, we're again helping, say, and keep the balance in the natural environment, either by increasing the mineral content of the soil, or through simply letting there be more in nature, so that resources are never replenished completely. The fourth example, rather than giving back to nature, would be a form of eugenics. This is again probably the most obvious one. Doing away with the bad things, with the unhealthy elements of the society, is very beneficial, obviously. If the bad apple spoils the bunch, so getting rid of the bad apple and getting rid of all the bad parts of your society, again, will help the society stay healthy. I'm probably going to talk more about this in the future and give some more examples from the past. And I do believe human sacrifice, in this element in particular, did exist. And this is one of the main ways in which human beings were sacrificed. Just to give two brief examples, because I will talk about more of this in the future, but it is the example that a lot of pagans seem to deny. They believe human sacrifice never existed, which is wrong, because it's probably the most documented form of sacrifice in pagan times. One example, in the writing of Tacitus, when he talks about how the Germanic people would drown homosexuals in bogs. That's an obvious example, and we do have many bog bodies from Ireland, and I believe also from Denmark, although I might be mixing up my time periods here. I believe that's also Iron Age. We do have bog bodies, people who were thrown face down in bogs. Often they were strangled first, and often they were mutilated in the Irish case. I'll talk more about those, about sacrifice in Ireland, and the kinds of sacrifice and where the ritual comes in. Because there is sort of an argument, a debate to be had. Is the ritual element of the murder in order to give an offering to a god who needs this, who needs to take these people? Or is it more sort of asking forgiveness for something which needs to be sacrificed, something which needs to be done away with? Is it one or the other? I will talk more about some more examples from archaeology and what I really believe in that element. But for now, the final element of sacrifice, if I can remember it, I'll just try to remember it now. So yes, the final element of sacrifice, I believe the fifth element anyway, if there are more, I can't remember, would be showing devotion. So, if you consider, for example, what did the gods owe us? I would say nothing. I would say, regardless of what we do in life, if we were to consider human beings being the state that we are, that we were when we were born, the gods owe us nothing. We played no part in our being born into this world. Our being is fated. And the fact that we are born into, and the fact that we received gifts, our destiny itself is a gift. Our being is a gift. Our souls are gifts. The ability that we have to choose, and the ability that we have to form an image of ourselves in nature. Even other life forms don't really have this ability the same way we have. Nothing in the natural world has it in the same way that we have. no organism is able to affect its environment in the same way that we humans are able to. And life is beautiful, and life is a gift. And so, it is us who owe the gods, not the gods who owe us. And so here we enter an explanation for, say, the more... I don't like the word esoteric because I believe it's aspiritual, I believe it's academic, anything esoteric. But the more sort of complex forms of sacrifice, spiritual sacrifice, themselves must be related to the gods directly. Often sacrifice happens in the form of giving to, say, more concrete concepts like nature, like the community, like other people. But the sacrifice to the gods, it's first and foremost is to show devotion. And if you look at the various steps in pagan prayer, which I'll go into again in another video, the fact of showing devotion is an essential part of the sacrifice. The sacrifice must begin first, and then you say that you are showing devotion, and then you complete the sacrifice. And so, showing devotion to our gods, to the creative and compelling forces, the forces that enable us with will and with being. We show devotion to those forces, because you cannot ask something of one of those forces without yourself giving to them. This is where the main distinction between pagan prayer and Christian prayer come in. Because in Christianity, you're basically, all you are giving to the gods is faith, or to God is faith. And the only promise you're making to God is that you're going to keep asking things from Him, that you're going to keep believing in Him. And if God didn't answer your prayers, you'd stop believing in Him. It seems selfish. It seems like you believe the world was just created for you to do what you will with it, and that life isn't a gift. Life is full of suffering, and really you deserve more than life, because that is what the Christian attitude is. I don't know if I'll make more videos talking crap about Christianity, so maybe I'll make this point now. In Christianity, they feel like, animals were created for man to do what he wants with them. That's what it says in the Bible. And that the environment is sort of just a playing field for man. And that human beings, as long as they are good and true and virtuous, deserve something beyond life, something more beautiful and eternal than life. That our finiteness and the amount we have to suffer is somehow unjust, and that it's a punishment. When people suffer, it's a punishment from God, or it's a test of some kind, rather than just being just another part of that gift, that destiny. That suffering is a means towards becoming, as pagans see it. So that's the final example I'll give, and I will go into more detail about human sacrifice, particularly from an Irish perspective or a Celtic perspective, because there are many myths which I want to dispel, and also I believe a lot of people underestimate things which are really true. But maybe that'll be my next video. But for now, bye. I forgot one final element of sacrifice, which is well documented anthropologically. It's perhaps one of the clearest forms of sacrifice that we see in primitive societies, tribal societies today, so I can't believe I forgot it. And it's the idea of making a statement that you do not need this, or that you in some way are powerful enough or strong enough to do without a certain thing. And these are always made in social context rather than in individual contexts. Although, hypothetically, I guess you could extend it to an individual level, proving to yourself you don't need this or that. Thinking of like giving up an addiction or something is sort of like that. But it's usually in a social context. So, for example, there are many hoards of gold or bronze found in lake sites in Ireland. And you'll find similar things across the continent as well. Deposits, ritual deposits. So what would happen is, at least what a lot of people think is, that the tribe would be gathered at a certain occasion and that the king or the chieftain would take an amount of his gold and he would just throw it into the lake. And in that way he was saying, you know, I don't need gold to be king. And at the same time he was saying, I have so much gold that I don't need this gold. And in a sense he was also making a statement. You sacrifice yourselves for me every day, and here's this sacrifice. You know, even I am not at the top, even I am below the gods, and things like that. And it's also another vein which it's done, which is at a smaller society. So a society which isn't sort of a tribe or a chiefdom, but more sort of like a band, like a hunter-gatherer society. Often somebody would go out of their way to get you know, a certain amount of spoils, a certain amount of rewards, and then they would just throw it away, or maybe give it to other people. And in that sense, they're sort of giving it large, is what they often call it anthropologically. They share out their possessions to others, saying, you know, I don't need this. There are some tribes who would often go outside of the society itself to collect wealth and bring it back. I remember I heard one story about a tribe in Papua New Guinea. There was a documentary made about it. And there's this guy who was a hunter-gatherer, like in a primitive society. And he would leave the society, go to the modern world, where he would steal cars and things like that, and bring them back and then just give them to people. And the guy was poor himself, but he just he went out of his way to get this wealth just to give it away. This also calls into question another point I was going to make, but maybe I'll leave it to another day, as to whether people deliberately hunt out wealth or possessions just to sacrifice them, or if the sacrifice has to be made by something which you would have had anyway, something which you come across by chance. And the thing which turned me onto this thinking was when Julius Caesar wrote about the Celts, and he talked about how enemy soldiers who were captured would be sacrificed, would be murdered. And it made me think, do these people really own the enemy soldiers? I suppose you could take them prisoner, maybe you could even make them your slaves, but were they sacrificed in a state of you owning them? And was it granted that you would have come into possession of these people, and so you're sacrificing something that belongs to you? Or did you go out of your way to capture these people just so you could kill them and give them to the gods? And again it turns into that old argument about where exactly does the ritual element of it come from? Is it that you were asking something of the gods and you have to give to them? Or is it simply you were asking just forgiveness or acceptance just so you could do this thing which is necessary for the society? Where does the necessity come from? Is it from the gods or is it from the human beings? But that's the last part of sacrifice, which I didn't mention.